Many of you have shared where you're from. I'm joining the call from Bethesda, Maryland. So if those of you have not shared where you're from, just let us know where you're joining from in the chat. And we'll spend the next hour together. And again, Emily's gonna send out, we're expecting about 30 people today, so I assume they'll join as they do. So, you know, as we think about, you know, certainly having Fareed Zakaria talk about his book, and I've read it now a couple times, and I was particularly inspired by his very hopeful message that he shared, and a reminder around the importance of cooperation, and we are all in the field and connected by a deep value and commitment to global cooperation. And as Fareed reminds us, it's one of the most fundamental traits in human beings, and that many biologists, and I'm quoting him, believe that it's the root of our survival over a millennial. And I just think about, you know, how important today, as we are very disconnected physically, that connection and cooperation to really solve challenges, whether they're individual challenges, you know, community, global. It's just so important that we are, you know, better off together. And you know, that book and you know, his ending comments were really a question to the readers around the fact that, you know, the pandemic has opened up a new world, and it's really ours to take that opportunity and not squander it, and that really nothing is written, nothing is set in stone, and we need to rely on history, and also in the reality that, you know, of importance of that sort of cooperation globally. So for us at Cultural Vistas, that was really a call to action and how we can better facilitate cooperation through our programs and our network. And our network is being represented today by all of you joining us. And the question that we have sort of before us is, how do we seize that opportunity to build a better and more peaceful world together? So we wanted to bring, you know, our network, if you will, together to contemplate that, you know, and how we sort of rebuild this world, and how we can play a role as an organization and a community to build that better world. And I'm really honored to have join us today an expert, Ambassador Richard LeBaron, who will sort of help guide us through a conversation around that. And Richard spent his entire career really helping nations and leaders cooperate and build a better world. And I'll share his more detailed background in a minute. So as a result of today's conversation, we want to develop a blog that would be kind of the starting point for us as an organization, taking into consideration kind of your thoughts and recommendations that we can work on over the next year, and how we do a better job at facilitating that global cooperation, and how we, you know, really work to empower people to build a better future. So I'm curious to just take a quick poll. How many of you have actually read the book? It's okay if you haven't, you know, we can, you know, the themes are broad that we can, you know, still discuss them. So Emily, if you want to throw that poll up, let's take a minute. Or I'll say even parts of the book. You don't have to finish the whole thing. And then the second question is, were you able to see Fareed Zakaria's keynote at our awards benefit back in October?
Whoa.
All right, while we're getting the results of that, if you all could just kind of put yourselves on mute while we go through this, we're getting a little bit of background feedback. Yeah. Emily, do you want to show up the results there? All right, awesome. So most of you actually were with us, so it's great to have you follow up on that. And we'll just show a quick video clip to refresh our memories of some of his key points, and then we'll dive into our discussion led by Ambassador LeBaron.
Sorry, give me just a moment.
Is a struggle, and there are movements back and forth, but you have to keep your eye on the prize, which is the constant forward motion that we have to be trying to achieve. And as you achieve that, there are going to be setbacks, there are going to be zigzags, there are going to be people who are, but it doesn't change the reality that we are actually moving forward. And that doesn't, it doesn't change the reality that it's only by moving forward that you solve these problems. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that this is sort of inevitable or that there is some great structural wave making this happen. No, it's happening because human beings are pushing in this direction. So you have to keep expanding that zone, and you have to keep expanding so you realize, as we learn more, we discover that we need to be careful about the environment. We need to be careful about the kinds of the way we're living. We need to be more inclusive and expanding the zone of tolerance for more and more people. And as we do each of these things, it rubs up against somebody, and they protest, and they get angry, and they get annoyed, and they feel like, why are you disrupting? Why can't we just go back to the old, simple, settled ways, right? That's this whole idea of this sort of Garden of Eden that America was in the 1950s, is premised on that idea that, why are we being so disruptive? Why do we have to start asking pesky questions about, whether it's right to honor Confederate generals and leaders? But it is precisely that process of examination and expansion that is the American story. The American story is really about this constant search for renewal and remaking and reinvigoration. So I look at that mess, and I say to myself, there's something very creative happening here. And I don't like, there's a lot of the silliness that I don't like either, but I try to keep my eye on that prize. And I think what I would say to everyone who's, who gets...
Okay, so just sort of kind of to refresh our memories of his message to all of us, and that we have to keep that forward momentum. So I'm gonna introduce Ambassador LeBaron. He's probably in one of the corners of your screen there. Ambassador LeBaron, in addition to being a farmer in Southern Virginia, is a career diplomat and serving now as a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, where he focuses on the Gulf and on broad issues of social change in the Middle East and North Africa region. He has spent 30 years abroad and in Washington, D.C., and his most recent overseas posting was as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in London. He also served as the U.S. Ambassador in Kuwait, as well as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Israel. Ambassador LeBaron is a huge supporter and believer in the power of public and citizen diplomacy. He recently published a really terrific blog called basically calling on the Biden administration to really act fast to bolster people-to-people exchanges in the Middle East. And if you haven't seen it, we'll definitely share that out for you. So Ambassador LeBaron, we'd love for you to share your perspectives on sort of the book and this sort of call to action for Cultural Vistas, and how we as a community can really move forward and re-envision how we build a better, more peaceful world.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I'm always excited about your events, and I'm greatly admire Cultural Vistas' work and your leadership at Cultural Vistas. It's critical work. Citizen diplomacy is just as important as any of the diplomacy that I was ever engaged in, and that's why I'm a constant supporter and cheerleader for it. There's a lot in Fareed's book. That's one of the things that strikes you as you read it, is he covers quite a range of issues fairly economically. I noticed in the acknowledgments that he had quite a cadre of staff to help him, but I'm sure that most of the ideas were his. But in any case, it was a great, timely book. And I just want to talk briefly about just a couple aspects of it, and then we can get to our discussion a little more deeply. He talked early in the book, he talked about the influence of something he called asymmetric influences. He talked about how 9/11 changed the course of our recent history. He talked about mortgage derivative instruments triggering an economic crisis in 2008. And then he talked about that pesky bat in China that carried this COVID bacteria and delivered it effectively. And he also mentioned the butterfly effect, and that's the effect of a butterfly flapping its wings somewhere in Africa and El Nino resulting in South America. In some ways, these asymmetric influences were mostly negative, but I think that works both ways. I think the prospect, for example, of an exchange, an individual exchange, having an asymmetric influence on its on the participant, on the people he or she interacts with, and on the civil life in the country they live in is considerable. And I think we know from experience that exchanges they open people's eyes to other societies, but far more than that, it seems to me that the impact is that exchanges open the eyes of the participants. And often the participants realize that they operate in a world context, in an international context. They have a new self-confidence in their ability effectively to change the world. And that's why exchanges are important. They really have an asymmetric impact. And the cost is insignificant compared to a lot of things we do. But the impact, I believe, can be huge. The other thing I'd like to mention, or two other things, but first, towards the end of the book, the author talks a lot about China. And I have to say that I have a feeling that we are only in the very, very beginning stages of understanding the role of China in the world and understanding how that's going to evolve. It's just such an interesting phenomenon for me. When I was living in India in 1983, my wife and I visited Beijing, we visited Shanghai. When we got to Shanghai, we looked around and we said, gosh, this place, it seems like it used to be a great city. It was a dead city in 1983, but it once had been a great international entrepot. And now if you go to Shanghai, it's unrecognizable. And that's in my lifetime. That's not even in my lifetime. That's in a third of my lifetime. That it has changed exponentially. In the life in China has changed exponentially. The impact of its economy, the growth of its economy. This is very, very difficult for us to digest. It's difficult for the Chinese to digest. So for us, and especially for someone like me who has never really spent any considerable time in China, Fareed's book in a way was a wake-up call that this is a big wave and we better start thinking about it in more sophisticated ways than just, is this the new Cold War coming towards us with China? Is China, the new superpower that we have to worry about? There's a lot more going on, and I think that the exchange process has to be a critical part of putting together a body of knowledge for Chinese and Americans about each other, because we are going to be the superpowers for the next 50 years. There's no question about that. The United States, as Fareed said, is still way ahead. But China and the United States combined are way ahead of everybody else. And that's just important to recognize and to build into our thinking. One final thing I just mentioned, and that is COVID. The curious phenomena for me about COVID is that it's introduced things that we would never have expected. And this particularly applies to exchanges. I, for years, was a strong skeptic of virtual exchanges. I thought this just doesn't work. It can't possibly work. It can't possibly have the value of person-to-person exchanges. I've been proven wrong. The organizations involved in exchanges have found ways to make virtual exchanges not a substitute, but an adequate instrument to carry out their work. And now I think we have to move on to the next step of that, because I think the innovation that took place during this period with virtual exchanges indicates to us that they aren't going away. They're going to be part of the mix no matter what. And I think we can really qualitatively improve the quality of exchanges by combining the two into a whole new instrument of virtual and in-person, a hybrid that doesn't look like anything we're doing today, but that will be an obvious thing as it emerges over the next 1 to 5 years. Finally, just a note, another thing besides China that I know so little about and that I figure I better get up to speed on is artificial intelligence. And Fareed talks about this in the book. It's all around us. It's coming at us very quickly, and it has meaning for what we do in the exchange world. I don't know what that meaning is, but I know there are a lot of smart people out there who should be thinking about it and what the implications are. Just as virtual had implications for us, artificial intelligence has implications for us. And we need to figure out, or begin to figure out what those implications are. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Ambassador LeBaron. We'd love to open it up to Q&A session with him, and then we'll break up into smaller groups and dig down into the different lessons in the book. But just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have or share any reflections with the group.
Ambassador, I have a question for you. Given your backgrounds and the topics discussed in Fareed's book, what skills do you see being critical for the future that we as an organization should be helping young people develop?
That's a big question, and I don't know. I don't want to give you a quick answer. I think the main benefit to exchanges is people seeing things they've never seen before and interacting with people they wouldn't normally have the opportunity to interact with. So I think those interactions, in a sense, it's regardless of the field. I mean, I've seen effective exchanges in water management as well as congressional staff or mullahs and clerics or interfaith exchanges. They all have value, but the inherent value in exchanges is this exposure to people who are different from you. And I think that has to be the theme. But the particular skills, I think that's certainly a moving target and moving more quickly and more quickly every year. So I don't have a clear idea of what skills you need to develop today for 10 years from now.
Thank you so much.
Jennifer, I have, it's more a comment than a question, but it's this. I'd like to join those who will put to bed the idea that COVID and perhaps other forces at work too are are basically building a wall against further globalization activities. If by globalization we mean the kind of the full array of commercial and social and other ways in which we are currently connecting with people of other countries, other races, and so forth. I feel that that globalization, I mean, if we'll accept that definition for just a moment, is not only going to survive, but that it's going to be more pervasive and more important every year going forward. And that includes exchanges, professional exchanges, kind of things we're involved in, and including a person-to-person model as well. So I think that we'll look back on COVID and 2020 as kind of a roadblock and not a sign of the beginning of the end of something that's been gaining steam over the last 25 years that we call globalization. And I also, Richard, I assume that the virtual form can also be an important part of this. But the business of sitting across the table or in chairs across the room from people from afar who are different from us, I think that's going to continue not only beyond my lifetime, but even beyond some of your lifetimes. So there we are.
I don't think virtual exchanges will ever replace in-person exchanges, Phil. And I think the value, I mean, you can think, for example, of inviting a foreign student to a Thanksgiving dinner in an American household. That has an indelible, permanent impact on the way that person views the United States. And there's no real substitute for it. Sharing a meal with family is one of the most powerful things you can do. And it's just one example of the value of person-to-person exchanges.
Am I on? Okay. I wanted to address both of your comments. First of all, I'm sort of an example of someone who is able to benefit from COVID in ways that are really extraordinary to me. My daughter works at Cultural Vistas, and I've participated in many of your events very recently, and I have been incredibly enriched by them. My own career, I'm now retired professor emerita of French, and I've done a lot of international work, and one of my goals has always been to promote the transformative effects of exchanges across difference. Continue to be interested in all of those things. But at any rate, the fact that I can be here with you and listen to the conversation, to hear Fareed, and then to talk to my daughter about it, and to share it with others, I have been incredibly engaged in a way that I don't think would have been possible before. As many disadvantages as there are, and as many fears as I initially had about sort of an inability to understand or to reject globalization as a process, I think if anything has been maybe enhanced by the possibility of being able to speak to people. I can see you close up one by one. I can hear your thoughts. I can see your smiles. In many ways, while one-on-one gives us some advantages, I think there's something really powerfully intimate about this kind of exchange that we can have with each other. We pay attention in ways that are, I think, quite unique and surprising to me. I just attended a 50th wedding anniversary for very dear friends who live literally, you know, not even a mile away, organized by their daughters who are also in the same area, but it included all of their relatives from Germany, and it included so many other possibilities. And one of the participants said, one of their friends said, you know, I've heard you talk about all of these people, but I never really had a chance to put a name to a face. I never had a chance to hear what they had to say. It was really enriching in an odd sort of way. We all raised our glasses at the same time for the toast, but it wasn't really, we weren't present, and we didn't have to worry about what we were wearing or whether the food was going to be ready on time or whatever. It was really an intimate experience that I had never really thought about. And I've participated in a lot more experiences like that. Our daughter's concerts, for example, are now available to us in just with a flick of a button. You know, it's quite wonderful, actually. And so I'm being more hopeful than I certainly was in the beginning when I saw all of these jobs go by the wayside, especially for Cultural Vistas, all of the changes that you all had to implement and all of the cutbacks. And it was just in some ways tragic, but I guess in the end, what we're trying to do now is come out of it, right? Are you waiting for a question? I also
think you made some good
comment, if you wouldn't mind. I was also really struck by another program that I was able to participate in, or not participate in, but listen to, was the program with Blaine Harding, and your connection, the Cultural Vistas' ability to connect diversity with the idea of internationalization and globalization. And I think that is going to be key for us in the future as well. It's going to be our opportunity to really raise some serious questions about what does it mean for us to engage with other people. His comments about cultural humility, I thought were profound. He really understood that in order for us to get beyond our differences, we really need to be able to talk to each other, acknowledge our biases, and stop being imposters. And so anyway, that's just a comment again about, and a shout out, I suppose, to Cultural Vistas for the work they're doing. I know it's hard.
Thanks so much for those reflections, Jan. Really, we're thrilled to be able to include you in so much more than we were. So thank you, and thanks for being part of it.
Pleasure.
We have a question from Dawn. Dawn, do you want to, I'm happy to read it, or if you want to share it with us.
Hi, hello. I'm not sure if you're able to hear me, but I see some smiles, so I'm assuming that means you do hear me.
We hear you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for leading this discussion today. I appreciate your reflections on the book, and it's caused me to think a lot about as well too. I work in education, so my work is largely focused on the next generation, which I think is going to lead us in many new directions, especially after this, what the post-COVID world might be like for them. I'd love to get your thoughts about the activism about our natural environment, especially by young people such as Greta, who recently had, was it Netflix or HBO, did a whole documentary on her, and how it became a movement that sort of swept through social media channels. And I'm really struck by their advocacy for us to help create a better world for them to inherit. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe what your thoughts were after reading Zakaria's book?
Well, I, as an old guy, I sort of discount youth, but frankly, I didn't do that when I was young. But I don't know that much about Greta. What I do know is that she proved that individuals can make a difference. You know, she did it courageously. She did it without worrying about the risks to herself. She did it without, you know, any embarrassment about the the depth of her feeling. And so I think that's a model that the young people should follow. I don't have any problem with that at all. And I think it's important, especially because I think there's a generational difference about our views on climate change. I think my generation just doesn't quite have its head around the threat of climate change. And that's probably because we're all going to be dead before it's really a critical issue. But if you're 15, or if you're 20, if you're 25 or 30, you're thinking, this is an issue for my life, for my career, for my future, and certainly for my children's future. That's not something that was part of the generation of my parents or my contemporaries. So I think the activism around environmental issues and climate change is long overdue. It has more momentum than I thought it might have had early on. And I think that one of the things that people need to realize is this is not just an environmental issue. It's about who gets what, which means politics. And if you want people to stop burning coal, or if you want people to not have cars on the roads, it's a political issue and you have to fight it out in the political arena. So, it has to be in all different areas, not just, social media, not just on the streets, but in who we elect to Congress and how we participate in international organizations and the types of exchange programs we sponsor. All these things make a difference. And so we have to think of it in that comprehensive way.
Thank you so much for your comments. I love seeing the creativity of, whatever millennials, Generation Z, Y, whatever label we're giving them. I don't know if anyone saw it, but I was really impressed by the young woman. She was creating TikTok videos about makeup, but while she was actually applying the makeup, she was actually talking about political change, and change for our environment. So she was using this creative way to get people to pay attention to her, which a lot of, people, young women will watch makeup tutorials, but yet the whole time she didn't even talk about makeup. She was talking about advocacy in other areas. And so I feel like one of the things that, Zakaria had talked about was sort of the equality of it and the equity, and sort of whose environment is going to be effective and who's going to come out ahead in this, and being able to protect their environment and ensure that we're all able to live within this environment and enjoy it equally. Other countries are, I'm rambling and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to stop, but, just the whole thing about where our garbage goes, that was, and that was all discussion before COVID. And so now I'm really interested to see how those discussions will circle back and how we start talking about that, in a new way, and how we're connecting over this issue using things like AI and this virtual exchange. And so yes, I am a cheerleader for the next generations. I always jokingly say that I know I did a great job when I can sit in my rocking chair with my 12 cats and look on the television and see people really motivated to make the world a better place for all of us. So that's my goal.
Thank you.
That's really inspiring, Dawn. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're gonna just stop and break into smaller groups, groups of 4. And Emily, if you want to just share with us what the topics will be. We'll do that for about 15 minutes and then come back together.
Sure. So we're going to have one group looking at lesson 4, which is people should listen to the experts and experts should listen to the people. Led by Jennifer. Lesson 5, led by Lauren, Life is Digital, which will touch on some of the topics already being chatted about. Lesson 7 will be in the main room with me, which is Inequality Will Get Worse. So we'll take a look at what he posits and try to come up with some discussion around in what ways and where we can be effective in that. And then Ambassador LeBaron will lead lesson 9, The World is Becoming Bipolar. So I'm randomly putting you guys into groups for these topics, and I believe what would be great is just a brief readout from the leaders at the end with a recommendation on how cultural vistas might, in exploring those lessons, be effective in exploring bringing our community together and coming up with solutions. So I'm going to open the rooms, and you should get a note, but if you have any tech issues, just stay back and I'll help you out. Hello.
Hello.
Unmute yourselves and say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I kept
Oh,
you
one
in
moment. Let me turn on my camera.
This is my post-COVID hair, which looks nothing like my LinkedIn profile. It's how long I haven't had a haircut. So welcome.
Yeah, I know my hair has gotten so long, and it was funny to kind of look back at pictures, professional pictures from events of yore. So just let's introduce ourselves for a moment, who we are and our relationship to Cultural Vistas. I'll start. I'm Emily Comer, and I'm Cultural Vistas Senior Officer for Alumni and Constituent Engagement, and I oversee our signature events, which have now gone virtual, including this one. So welcome, everyone, and I'll pass it over to Dawn to introduce herself.
Hi, Dawn Harris-Wooten. I've been worked in international education for going on 15 years now. I used to work right across the street at NAFSA from Cultural Vistas, if anyone's familiar with DC. So I worked there for 8 years, and I actually quit in January to take on a new challenge, and then came COVID, so no challenge. But that's fine. I'm hunkered down here in Fort Collins, Colorado, enjoying the nature. So nice to meet you.
Welcome. Tanya?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya. I work at InterExchange. So we are an organization whose activities are quite similar to Cultural Vistas. So we're a fellow J1 visa sponsor. So we work with summer work travel, intern trainee, camp counselor, au pair programs. We send Americans overseas. Of course, this year has been quite tricky for our industry. In my role, I'm in external engagement. So I do advocacy work, cultural engagement for our participants. So it's like a soup of different activities. And I saw the invite to this event in my inbox, and I got curious. So I'm very glad I'm able to join this discussion.
Thanks for joining, Tanya. No, I know we've enjoyed working together on some initiatives around advocacy for J1. And I'll let Phoebe introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to meet you virtually. I'm Phoebe Hybeck, and I work with Emily at Cultural Vistas on our program development team. I'm a program development officer, and we do a lot of the new programming initiatives that Cultural Vistas brings in. My primary portfolio is in the Pacific at the moment.
So I chose lesson 7 to discuss, and it's a big topic. I don't think we'll come up with any solutions, but I wanted to provide just some pieces of how Fareed Zakaria describes inequality and how it will get worse, because I thought it was really interesting. When I thought of inequality, think of poverty, and actually he points out that in some metrics we have around the world, poverty has really extreme poverty, those living in extreme poverty. The United Nations established in their Millennium Development Goals the goal of raising people out of extreme poverty, those who live on less than $1.25 a day. And they reached that goal 5 years ahead of schedule. And that's amazing, right? You know, if we really think of that. And yet, he says, because of COVID, we could see those gains lost. So extreme poverty still exists, but at least now we know what the tools were that worked in order to work on eradicating that. So there's that template. But the other big one he talks about is inequality between those who have, oh my goodness, it's snowing outside. I'm sorry, I just looked up and it's snowing in New York. Those who have access to healthcare, to good healthcare, and those who don't. So health will be our greatest inequality, and COVID really shows us that, because unlike the idea that health is some sort of equalizer, that no matter where you live or how much you make, you know, a pandemic is an equalizer, actually that's been proved wrong by and large, and especially here in the United States. And when we look at other countries around the world with universal healthcare programs, the US is interesting because it is a wealthy country like many European countries, but not everyone does have healthcare. So we've seen that communities worse hit by COVID, and we've seen the United States dealing with COVID in ways that seem very heartbreaking and kind of surprising given the wealth and the resources we have at our disposal. So inequality will get worse, which seems, you know, like something that is really big, and how can we stop it? But, you know, so is the answer healthcare? Is the answer around that? And you know, what does it look like for those living in poverty? Any other thoughts about that big gap in inequality? I know it's a really big topic, but those are the two bigger points that stood out to me from his chapter on this.
I'll jump in there. I guess when you're unemployed, you have a lot of time to think about things. That's for sure. Because I've lived in several states in the U.S. And so, and I made the choice to move from DC to come out here to Colorado. And, you know, one of the things I noticed immediately was, at least in the county that I'm living in, was a lot of advocacy for people to have access to healthcare. And I thought this was really, I was actually super pumped about it, you know, and there was even the county that I live in, you could even like apply for Medicaid. And if you don't have an address, you could just say you're a person who doesn't have a home and you live outside somewhere, or you tend to like be in a certain location, and your application, you can actually write like that location. So like that's like where your home is. And they have all these different resources. And it was just surprising to me when I think about like DC and its homeless population and how things were handled there. And there was a lot of medical needs. And then I come out here, and granted the population size is much different, but that they were so progressive in like ensuring that everybody was going to be healthy, like at the bottom line. And it really just, it had to move all the way across the country to experience what that feels like for like the county to care that much, that we don't even care if you have an address. We just want to make sure that you are getting medical care, and it's everywhere. And so it really motivated me to think about how it triggered the thought about what you're saying, Emily, about how the inequality of healthcare and who has it and who doesn't. And how many things here are written in multiple languages to make sure that everybody can read it. And there's even like different Wi-Fi hotspots in the area where if all you have is a cell phone and you need to access, Wi-Fi to be able to check your email or something, but you don't have a home per se and you can't go to the library, you can just go to that Wi-Fi hotspot and tap into it, and then you can suddenly get information so you can, set up an appointment or whatever it is. It just blew my mind, and I thought, wow, gosh, if this could just be everywhere, so then a person could be out in the middle of Iowa and still feel like they had someone, they could talk to someone virtually about really getting the healthcare they needed and setting up an appointment. So I think that there is a lot of credibility to what he says about it being an equalizer, who has it and who doesn't. And if you're not healthy, nothing is going to work out right for you. I mean, if you're living in pain, it's a miserable way to try to make things happen, especially if we already know that the frontline workers tend to, a lot of them don't have they're not well-paying jobs. They're the people that are providing our customer service for us in the grocery store. Anyways, I could go on for days, but I thought it was a really interesting topic that he brought up. And I think it is important. And I hope that the next White House administration really looks at this closely to make sure that everyone's feeling like they're part of this society. You don't just have to have a lot of money to get someone to, take care of you.
Brought up a really good point about community care. Phoebe and Tanya, you both kind of work in areas where you work with communities. Phoebe in Southeast Asia, and Tanya, your exchange community, right? Your community leaders. We had a talk recently about digital healthcare, and one of the big learnings was healthcare is local. Healthcare, so communities taking care of each other because of your environmental factors influence it. What are your thoughts on inequality and how that can be addressed by local communities with a global perspective?
I guess my take on this, I have a very, I'm originally from Ukraine, so I've lived in the US for the past 13 years, but there is still a lot of things that I'm learning as I go, and also the older I get, the more I'm exposed to different angles of the society. And but my take on what Emily, you mentioned is that with some examples of my work with our exchange participants is that first of all, there is a very I think unrealistic image about the US that exists in the world, that is created by movies and visuals, that everybody here is very rich and life is great, everything is easy, and that's probably the image that a lot of our participants come when they arrive here. But then, of course, once they start living in different parts of the US, they see a lot of inequality, a lot of issues that may exist in the context of different communities, geographical areas in the United States. So what we do, one of the aspects when we plan cultural engagement for our students when they're here, outside of just taking them to museums, having dinners with American families, we also try to educate them on different issues that exist and the different ways how the US society and communities are coping with these issues. So we always create some volunteer experiences for them so they can learn about the environment and how community members can come together to address these questions in their local areas through beach cleanups, for example. We work with different food banks where we also invite our participants to volunteer. So sort of kind of using these experiences as education for them and also hands-on learning opportunities so they can contribute themselves in those areas where they spend their time here, and also hopefully learn some techniques that people use here and bring them back to their own countries and in case this sparks some inspiration for them in their future work. But the US is so big and so varied, you know, like your experience is so different depending on where you are.
Very true. Phoebe, do you have any thoughts? We have about a minute left. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, this is such a great conversation. Thank you all for sharing your insights, and it's just such a great conversation to be having. I think a lot about our participants that are implementing small grants projects, and they've identified local issues within their community through the lens of a holistic approach and making sure that every voice is represented at the table when creating a solution. And I have just learned so much from that because it helps really tailor solutions to solve issues that are genuine and thoughtful and really considerate of all of the levels and challenges that might be impacting one piece of the larger issue or all pieces of the larger issue. And I think it really helps create a holistic approach to solving a challenge, so it doesn't create more challenges, but also is really respective of the community context, the people who live in that community, and also just I think it really helps us create a more environment or a better environment of togetherness, in which, you know, we are all looking out for each other and really creating solutions that speak to that. Apologies, Emily, I believe you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Phoebe. I was just saying we have like 60 seconds left. That was my timer for the breakouts close. So I wanted to thank you all. I'm going to share out this recommendation. You know, around inequality, the healthcare disparities will, you know, emerge due to COVID, and that will create large inequalities in the global societies. But healthcare is something that is very community oriented, and we actually have a network. We did an exchange program some years ago called the Welcoming Communities. It was a transatlantic exchange, but that idea is there, and we have alumni and resources around this idea of creating welcoming and resilient communities, and I think healthcare can be a really big part of that. That could be a new exchange that we develop, and I know that, oh, there we go. Everyone's coming back to the main room.
Here we are.
But, you know, around that, so that's what I'll share out. Hi, welcome back, everyone. We're back. It goes by fast, doesn't it?
Okay, so you want to do a quick like 30-second share out?
Sure, I can go. I can get us started. Lesson 4 was inequality will get worse. But one thing that's really comforting, I guess, is that, you know, in many ways around extreme poverty, we've kind of eradicated a lot of that through goals, by having goals. So even though we'll see some gains lost for that, we have those tools available. So the other part of inequality that Fareed Zakaria identified is around healthcare and those disparities. And we talked about how healthcare is really local, community-based. And so strengthening communities to be able to respond to that. And that's an area that Cultural Vistas has some really good knowledge base around. We did an exchange many years ago around welcoming communities, building resilient communities. That's something we could spread. It was a transatlantic exchange, but we could spread out globally around health and creating, you know, welcoming, resilient, and healthy communities so that those health disparities don't exist. And by exchanging those global perspectives on health, I know that our participants and alumni from welcoming communities benefited so much from hearing what other communities in Germany were doing in the US and vice versa. So I think that's something we can do globally. That's our recommendation.
Awesome, thanks, Emily.
And I'll go next for lesson 5. So our lesson was Life is Digital. And we discussed that Cultural Vistas has an important role to play in helping to bridge the gap between access to technology. We have to be mindful that more and more communities may not have the same level of access to the digital tools that we take for granted in our lives. So we need to be building in either budget or trainings, or just in general, keeping in mind that the communities we want to serve may not have the same level of access to technology that we do, and we need to play a role in bridging that gap. The other main item we discussed is that culture is more accessible now than it ever has been, thanks to the rapid rise in virtual programming. So again, while there's a lot of negatives that we can't travel, we can find new ways to leverage the wonderful new virtual assets that have been created to help program participants have a deeper understanding of culture, not just be traveling.
Thanks, Lauren. Richard, do you want to share out from your group?
Sure. We talked a lot about China and how we might relate to China better as an organization. And we didn't come up with anything terribly ambitious, no great leap forward. But we thought that it certainly would merit doing sort of a modest market study on how Cultural Vistas might be able to expand its work related to China. And this could include alumni. It could include somehow trying to relate to the thousands of Americans who have taught English in China over the last 10, 15 years. It could relate to regional exchanges where we would bring Chinese to places where there's particular lack of understanding in the United States about China, and see if we can make some contribution to address some of these issues. But we were modest in our ambitions, and we noted that there's been a decline in Chinese students, pretty precipitous one apparently, and that there are increasing restrictions on them from both governments. So it's somewhat of a minefield, but there's certainly, we need to be working in that field. And as a final note, and you know this hobby horse, Zakaria mentions the term soft power in the chapter we saw. And as you know, nothing that you do is soft power. It's real power, it's real diplomacy. There's nothing soft about it. So I urge all of you to avoid that term in describing what you do.
Hear, hear.
Agreed.
Joe Nye needs to be strung up.
I'll do the last one. So ours was around people need to listen to experts. Experts need to listen to the people. And we had a great discussion because JR is actually a family physician in Iowa, and he's living and breathing this as we speak, of people not going to politicians versus going to doctors to find answers for how to deal with COVID. But we really focused on the importance of, we're not listening to each other because of the political divide that is causing skepticism on both sides, both experts and regular people, that it's really about building the relationships to build that trust so we can have conversation that is about things that we have in common versus what separates us. We talked even about how we can implement the fundamentals of international exchange in building those people-to-people relationships and trust in a more domestic way, in a sort of like a microclimate, if you will, and looking at within our own country how to help facilitate that relationship building and understanding so that we can start dialogues and not continue on the path of people rejecting expert advice at their own peril, and engaging in that dialogue and relationship to build the trust. So really great conversation.
Jennifer, can I just tack on to that and say, this is a perfect example. We brought together experts, we brought together people working in different fields, facilitating exchanges, those who are retired and just interested for themselves. And that's a great way to break down that barrier. And so thank you all for coming and those great recommendations.
And as we said, so this really helps us think about, as we're doing planning for next year, we're just about to unveil our new strategic plan, and many of the conversations that we're having like this help inform that and the things that we should be doing. So really grateful to your inputs around this and just kind of sharing your own experiences and advice. I want to thank Ambassador LeBaron for leading our conversation and sharing those wise words and advice as well. And thanks all for joining today. It's a great discussion. And as I said, the result we'll be putting together a blog that we'll be sharing out and sharing these recommendations and putting them to work. So
Thank you
all.
Jennifer.
Thank you for
All
sponsoring
right.
this. It was wonderful.
Thanks for
Nice to meet
joining.
everyone. Thank you for
Good
coming.
to see you.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.